So welcome back to the second part of this project. And if you are here to see the first part, please I beckon on you to check it out. In the first part, we saw how to set up a new Spring Boot project, and we also incorporated the use of Spring Data REST as well as JPA and Hibernate. Now, to all of the previous viewers that have seen that first part, it did take some time before I am uploading the second part. Please, I want to express my sincere apology because I was held up in a task. That was why it really took much time. So I beg you guys to stick with me and do subscribe to this channel if you are here to do so, as well as ping that bell icon so that whenever I upload new videos, you get notified. And in this second part, we'll be taking a look at Spring security, testing, and also be deploying our application to render. I did stated from the very first beginning that we'll be deploying to two different hosting platforms, which includes Render and AWS. Now, just to keep everything on a single piece, I'll be deploying on Render alone for this application. And Render is also a good hosting platform. It makes things simplify. You don't have to register with any credit card or any sort of thing to get an application there. So that is why. Now I'll be making a separate video and showing you guys how to upload and deploy an application on AWS. So please do subscribe to this channel and ping that bell icon so that when that video is live, you get notified. Now, in addition to that, learn at iocode.com is pretty much hosted on Render too. So just so you know, Render is also an interesting and good hosting platform. So with all of those stated, we can get started with our project. So I'll open up IntelliJ, and inside of the pom.xml file, I'll be including the Spring security dependency. So now right inside of IntelliJ, I want to include the Spring security dependency. So do a dependency tag at first, and I'll use a tab. Then we have to include the group ID for Spring security, and that group ID should be from org.spring framework.boot. So that is it. And the next one is the artifact ID, and that is Spring boot data security. And one more dependency when it comes to securing our application. Since we'll be running test cases, we have to include the Spring security dependency and the scope of test itself. So do a dependency again, and group ID of org.spring framework.security, and this should be Spring security test. In addition, I want to set a scope of test. So that is it. So setting a scope of test simply let our application knows that we will be using libraries or classes from this particular dependency for our test cases, for running our security test cases. Now, for the test cases, when it comes to databases, we will have to include one more dependency. We'll do it again, dependency, group ID com.h2 database, and that is it. And we have to include the scope because we already have Postgres for the runtime, so we need to include the scope of tests for our H2 database. just to prevent conflict. Now the next thing for us to do now is to reload our application, Ctrl+Shift+O, and that will automatically resolve the dependencies we have added to the pom.xml file. So immediately these dependencies are being resolved, I'll start the application, and then we can test our endpoints to see how Spring Security secures our application with just the basic configuration that Spring Boot provides for us. So now the application has been resolved successfully. The next thing now is to run the application. I think I have some CVs here. It doesn't really matter. So the application is building already. So I'm going to drag this stuff to the top so we can see all of the logs clearly. There's a huge chunk of the log. Okay, now there are some new and extra additional log. As we can see, we have Spring generating a password for us. You can see using generated security password, and this is the password, is the UUID Spring string that Spring Security automatically generates for us in order for us to be able to access our application. And it says this generated password is for development use only. So when you are shipping your application to production, you'll have to configure your new user and different implementations for you to generate password, and that is what we'll be doing in a moment from now. But at first, let us see how Spring Security secures our application for us in the most basic way possible. So I'm going to open up a Postman, and I'll go to the getBooks endpoint, and what I want to do is just simply call all of the books, get all of the books from the server. I'll click on send, and now we have a 401 unauthorized. This is as a result of including just the Spring Security dependency. Now we are here to provide any configuration for Spring Security itself, but Spring Security under the hood provides us with what is known as basic authentication. So it secures our application using basic authentication. So for us to be able to access our application or any endpoint in our application, we have to provide the necessary credentials that Spring Security demands from us. So I'll minimize, and then I'll copy the whole of this password, and straight to Postman again. I want to go to the authorization part, and from no auth we have to choose basic auth, which is basic authentication like I've stated. Now for a start, the username that Spring Security wants us to access our application with is simply user. Now the password should be the UUID generated string, so I'll paste it here, and then I'll send. So now when I send, you will discover that we now have the details of all the books in our server, or perhaps in our database. So you understand how Spring Security works under the hood to provide this basic security restriction for our application. So that is it. Now look closely. You see that even if I'm to call the author endpoint now, I'll do authors, and I remove one of these credentials, or I just include an S, and then I send, you still see we have a 401 authorized. So with each request, we are to include this particular credential, the user and the UUID string generated by Spring. So if for a real world application, the request gets intercepted by an attacker, guess what? These details will be stolen by that attacker. Now I've made mention that this is not a full Spring Security course. I'll be doing that in the future, but I just want to give you an insight of how some security policies have been implemented, and how this kind of basic authentication for an application that involves both client and server could be dangerous. So we'll be using JWT in that case. So we'll be using a token implementation. Though the details of a particular user will be stored in that token. But before I get started with JWT, I'll want to show you how Spring Security can be used alongside with Jwts in order for us to secure our application, or perhaps as Jwts can be used with Spring Security to secure our application. That should be the proper term, I guess so. Now, with all of those stated, I would love to show you how Spring Security works under the hood. And so right now we are going to take a look at how Spring Security secures our application. Now for a start, we have this image on our screen, and you discover that we have what depicts a full stack application that includes the client side and the server side. And so far, our client for the project has been Postman, but in reality, you are going to have a client such as a front-end application that is being built with either React, Angular, or Swift, as the case may be. So now, when a client sends a request down to the server, that request is intercepted by what are known as filters. So these filters follows a series of a particular chain of commands. So from one filter, if that filter passes successfully, it delegates to the next filter. So that is how it works. So prior to the time when we added the Spring Security dependency, one filter was not inside of this application, and that filter is known as the authentication filter. But immediately we added Spring Security dependency, Spring Boot or auto configures our application based on the dependency it finds in the path. So it automatically included the authentication filter as one of the filters that will be intercepting the requests coming from the client side. So what the authentication filter does is it filters the request to ensure that the client is accessing resources that it can access. That means if the client is not authorized to access some particular resources, then the request would not be sent. Sorry, the response will not be sent back to the client. So that is how it works. But then again, the authentication filter does not have all the necessary logic to implement this functionality. So it delegates that responsibility to an interface known as the authentication manager. So this is the contract. An authentication manager will deal with most of this logic. Now, I want to give you a brief explanation of how an authentication manager really works. Let us take a look at our mobile devices, for example. There are a couple of ways which we can use to unlock our devices. One of such is with the use of the fingerprint, and the other is with the use of the password or the face identification unlock. So these are different processes, and these different ways of unlocking devices are being managed by an authentication manager. So for a password way of unlocking the device, we have an authentication manager for that. For that of the fingerprint, we also have for that, and for that of the face unlock, we also have for that. So that is how authentication manager works. But then the authentication manager is going to make use of the authentication provider, and in turn, the authentication provider makes use of a user details service. So this user details service is used to search for the particular user that is trying to access the application based on information that might have been sent alongside the request from the client, maybe in the form of the body or inside of the header of that request. So it finds the user and uses the password encoder to validate the password that is coming from the client against the password of the user that it finds. And if this process turns out that this user is valid to access the resources, it's being sent to the authentication filter, which in turn delegates that authenticated entity to the security context. So that entity is saved in the security context. However, if the reverse is the case, a 401 unauthorized is sent back as response to the client. So that is the brief overview of how Spring Security secures the application. Now, in addition to what I've been saying, by default, Spring Boot automatically configures the application to make use of basic authentication. But we won't be making use of basic authentication for our application because we don't want to keep sending the credentials of the user alongside every request down to the server. So we're making use of JWT, and because of the flexibility of Spring, we'll see how to interoperate our application with JWT. So with that stated, let us take a look at what a JWT is. And so now, before we get started with any implementations of the JWT token, let us quickly take a look at what JWTs are from this endpoint, jwt.io/introduction. You can as well visit this endpoint to get more insight on what JWT is. I'll just give you a brief overview of JWTs. First of all, I'll have to move down to the part where we see what a JWT consists of. So right here, it says the JSON token consists of 3 parts separated by dots, and these parts are the header, the payload, and the signature. So therefore, a JWT typically looks like the following: x.y.z, and it just gives you an insight of what JWTs are. But then we'll be seeing the JWT much more in detail when we move over to the next tab. But before then, let us move down a little bit. See, now we have to break down. The header consists of 2 parts: the type of token, which in our case is the JWT, and the sending algorithm being used. So the algorithm we'll be using for our JWT is the HS256. So the HS256 is the same as this HMark SHA-256 or ROSC. So we'll be using the HS256, and this is an example of the header in JSON format. It's encoded in a JSON format. Now the next thing is the payload. Before the payload, you can see that then this JSON is base 64 URL encoded to form the first part of the JWT. Now the second part, it says, is the payload, and it contains the claims. Now claims are statements about an entity, typically the user. One of statements about an entity that we'll be using, which will be the user in our application, could be the username or the user email, or even the user date of birth. Just depend on what you choose as the claims. And additional data. So there are 3 types of claims: registered claims, public claims, and private claims. What we'll be looking at now is the registered claim. You can do well and read more on public and private claims on this endpoint, so you get a proper understanding of what those claims are. But before we move over again, let me just explain what registered claims are. Like I've stated, it can be the username, the date of birth, or any other relevant information in the creation process of the JWT token. I say these are set of predefined claims which are not mandatory but recommended to provide a set of useful interoperable claim. Some of them are issuer, expiration time, subject, and even audience. So that is it for the registered claims. Now once again, an example of the payload in JSON form looks like this. We have the subject, we have the name, and we also have the admin status. Now all of these are claims, so you know these informations right here are claims. And the payload is then base 64 URL encoded to form the second part of the JSON web token. So that is basically it for the header and the payload. Now what we'll be looking at is the third part, which is the signature of the given JWT token. I say to create the signature part, you take the encoded header, the encoded payload, the secret, the algorithm that was specified in the header, and sign that. So if you are using the HS256 algorithm, the signature will be created in the following way. So this is what we use to create the signature, but then it automatically does it during the generation of the JWT token. So we just have an overview and an insight of how this particular signature is being created. Now the function of the signature is to verify that the message wasn't changed along the way. And in the case of token sent with a private key, you can also verify that the sender of the JWT is who it says it is. So the signature basically has to verify that the information contained in the payload or the header wasn't changed along the way. Even if it has been intercepted and maybe an attacker changes the details inside of the JWT token, the signature becomes invalid. So that way it becomes difficult for our application to get attacked. So that is it for the JWT. Now let us take a look at the JWT.io part that decodes a JWT token. So like we stated, it consists of three parts, and this first part is the header, which is base64 URL encoded. Then we also have that of the payload, and then we have the signature. As you can see now, we have informations. Now if I'm to change part of the payload, maybe to T, discover that it becomes invalid, I think. Perhaps. Okay, I'm still connected, but then that is just it. You see, we now have this information here, just changing the payload. Now with all of those stated, let us see how to create our own JWT token in our own application. So right now we are going to start implementing JWT for our application. But before we get started, there are a couple of things we'll be needing. First of all, we need to create a user class, and that user should be an entity because we want to persist our users. The users of our application should be stored in the database where it won't just be erased during the startup of the program or the closing of the program. So that is it. So, and then we'll be including the dependency for JWT inside of the pom.xml file. I have those dependencies and I open them all inside of Notepad. So I'll be copying the whole of this dependency, then I'll paste it inside of the pom.xml file. So I'll be adding these three dependencies to the description of this video. So all you have to do is just move down to the description, copy the whole of these dependencies and add it to your pom.xml file, and then you reload. So now the user that Spring Security makes use of in the whole authentication process implements a user details interface that has been provided by Spring Security. So for us to create our user, we have to implement the user details. Now Spring has its own user, and that user is not what we'll be using. This is because we don't want to couple our application that much with a particular framework. So we want to be in charge of the user class that we're implementing. So just do an auth insert, and then do our class name user, and before the implementation, let us annotate our class with the respective annotation that is required. So entity getter builder, and then finally at table. So okay, let me do that properly. So it should be users underscore users. So the reason I'm including this particular configuration for the name of the table that will be created by Hibernate is due to the fact that I'm making use of the Postgres DBMS, and during the installation process of Postgres, a table is created automatically. That table contains the different users of the application, that is the Postgres application, and that table is called user. So if I'm to leave this class as is without providing this particular configuration during the startup of the program, it's going to throw an error because a table with the name users already exists in the database. So that is why I'm giving it a new name with underscore users, just to specify that it's still users from this particular application. I'm going to start providing the different field variables that I'll be needing. Then I'll go ahead and implement the user details that has been provided by Spring Security. So First of all, we need an ID. That should be a private long user ID. Then following for the first name, so these are the different fields for our user: the first name, the last name, the email, the password, as well as the age. Now for the ID, we'll also be annotating it with at ID, then at generated value, should have a strategy of generation type dot identity. So I'll just click on enter on that one, give it to extra space, and that is it. Now I want to implement the user details from Spring and also provide implementations for the different method that it provides. So that should be implement user details, and just click on OK. So we have to implement the methods, then OK again. So let me just explain this method in a bit, so you get a little understanding of how these methods are. So the get authorities returns the list of authorities that a particular user has, while the get username returns the username of the user. In this case, we want to return a value of email. I can as well do this dot get email, since the email is a unique value that only a particular user is going to have. So the username is pretty much the email of that particular user. Now his account expired, if it's false, implies that the user is valid to access that particular endpoint or to access the application. But guess what we have here is account non-expired. So in that case, we want to flag this from false to true, and it also applies to the other ones. What we have is account non-locked, his account non-expired, and is enabled. So his account is enabled has to be true. So what we have to do is just highlight the whole of this and change their values from false to true. So that is it. For the get authorities, we'll leave as is at the moment. We'll leave at the value of null. Then we want to go ahead and create an interface for our user, which is the user repository interface. So that's insert again, and interface should be extend CRUD repository user, and then the type of the ID, which is long. So that is it for our users class and our users repository. And so now we have seen how to create our user class that we'll be using, as well as the repository for our user. And the next step now is to start with the process that generates our JWT token. And so for that, we'll be creating a service class. So that class should be known as the JWT service. So to go ahead and continue with the application, I just have to click on this topmost package. And then our alt and insert, we want to create a new Java class. And I'll place this class in a new package called service. And that should be JWT service. Now at first, I'll be annotating the class with at components. So Spring knows to create a bin during the startup of the application for me. Then to generate a JWT token, you need a couple of things. One of them is the secret, that is one, and then the claims as well as the key. So let us see how to create a secret. To create a secret, we'll be using git bash. So I'll open up git bash right here. I want to create a secret key at first. So do open SSL from -is 64. Then I want to make the string not more than a length of 32 and click enter. So this is the secret string that we'll be making use of. Now if you don't have git bash installed, I have a video showing you step-by-step procedures on how to install it, so you can as well generate the base64 secret key directly with git bash. So you check out that video and install git bash on your own part. So then I want to define a field that should be a private string secret string equals to, and I paste it here. But then again, we want to ask ourselves, is this really a secret if it's being seen by everyone that has access to the source code? It automatically defeats the process, right? Defeats what I'm trying to say. So what we have to do now is hide this content inside of the application.properties file. So I'll just cut it out. Then this very first part, I'll just remove it. And right here, I'm going to annotate with @value. Then we want to get hold of a placeholder from our application.properties file. That will be jwt.secret.string. So that is it. We need a semicolon. So opening my application.properties file, I'll do a jwt.secret.string. I'll equate it to the string we just generated. So that it is. Back to the class, we now have to generate our key, the key that we'll be using for signing in the token. So to do that, we'll create a public private method that returns a key. And this key is directly from Java security, so you just click on enter. I want to say generate sign key. At first, we want to convert all of those, right? Or the secret string. We want to convert the secret string to an array of bytes. So I have bytes. Decoders .b64.decode. I want to decode that secret string. So that is it. Now I want to return keys.hmac, which is our algorithm, and then we'll pass in the byte that was being decoded previously. That would be byte, and that is it. So this is the key that we will be returning. And the next step, since we now have the key, we can start with the generation of our JWT token. So now we'll create a public method, and it returns a string because our token will be in a string format. And we say generate token. So it's going to take in a parameter. And as you all know, this parameter will be the claims that we'll be using in the generation of the token. So it's a map of claims. So we have a map of string and object, and I will call them claims. Let me import sorry for that. So let me import the class, the map class. So to generate a JWT token, all I have to do is set the relevant and necessary information. At first, I'll be creating a date, which I will call the issue date. Or perhaps not issue date, but issue that, and it's equal to new date. I want to pass in system dot current times millis, and I want to set the expiration date. So say date expiration date should be equals to new, or perhaps no, we should have issued new date system dot current time minutes plus 8000 times 60 times 24. So this is to add to make our token have a lifetime of a day. So that is it. To start with the process of generating the token, we'll use the string value, and we'll say token is equal to jwts dot builder dot compact. In semicolon. Then the next thing we want to do is return the token. So that is it. Now between the builder and the compact, we have to set some of the information that is required for the token, that is required for the generating of the token. And one of those information is the claims. So we are going to set the claims. So we say set claims. I'm passing the claims that was passed as parameter to this set claims function. So we say claims, and the next one is to set the issue that. We just pass in the date value, which is issue that we just defined previously, and the next is to set expiration date. So we do expiration date. Oops, deleted everything. So we do expiration date, and the next one on the list is to sign the token. So recall that this signing part generates the signature of the token. So we take in the algorithm that was specified and sign the header and the payload alongside with it. So for that, I'm going to use a dot. So we say sign with. Now we have the key, which is generate signing key, comma, signature dot signature algorithm dot hs256, which is the algorithm we used in the generation of the key. So that is it. With this, we have generated our JWT token. Now there is something you must I didn't include in this part, which is the set subject. So I could have just set the subject by saying set subject, but what I want to do is pass the subject as value, or perhaps as parameter, to the function, and that subject will be placed inside of this claims object. I'm going to be looking at how to achieve that in a couple of minutes from now. So that is it for the generation of the token. But then now, after we have pretty much generated our token, and this token has been sent to and fro the request and the response, we still need something to extract the value. So we'll be creating a function that extracts the claims from the token. So to do that, I'll be creating a new function, and that should be public, and it returns a claims object, a set of claims, and we get oops, I'm coming. Okay, we're going to call this function extract all claims. Then we're going to pass in the token as parameter. Now we'll create a claims object. You see claims is equal to Jwts dot pizza builder dot get body. Now this function is not a part of this class, so we'll be adding information that is automatically going to make it a part of the class. So first of all, just separate this single lines. We want to pass in the signing key, so we're going to say set signing key, and we're going to generate our signing key. And the next one is to build, and afterward we are going to paste the claims Jwts, and then we'll pass in the token as parameter to this function. So I can as well return the claims, but what I'll just be doing here is delete the whole of this part and return. So let me shift this a little bit backward. So that is it. And I'll still do the same thing for the generating token method or function. I'll just change all of this to a return statement. Then I'll remove this part. Okay, so that is that for the generating of the token and the extraction of the claims from the token. Now what we want to do now is to create functions that extract the different claims from the claims that we'll be having. One of such functions is the subject of the function, the expiration date, and those are the two main functions that we'll make use of for the validation of our user on create the JWT auth filter. So now to do that, we want a public. I want a date at first for the expiration, so we take extract expiration. I'm going to pass in the token as parameter, and then what we want to do now is extract all claims at first, passing the token as parameter, and then we are going to get the expiration. So that is it. Now the whole of this statement will return it. So automatically this function is going to extract the expiration date from the given JWT token. And the next thing we want to extract is the subject of the token. To do that, we say public string extract subject, passing the token again as parameter, and then want to return extract all claims, passing the token again, and then get the subject. Now we want you to follow me closely because the implementation I'll be making, you have to ensure that it follows the same pattern. If not, you won't be able to extract the subject on your own part, except you have pretty much set the subject right here during the generation of the JWT token. But then you see I'm going to pass in the subject as parameter to this function, or perhaps as one of the claims that will be in our map object, to ensure that we'll be able to extract the subject too from our JWT token. So I think for now, this is pretty much what we need. The extract expiration date as well as the extract subject. Now let us go ahead, start our application, and before any call to any of the endpoints, I want to implement the command line runner. So we can generate a JWT key and decode that same JWT during the startup of the application. So I'll just implement command line runner. I will then provide implementations for the run method, and okay, private JWT service. So you all know we'll get an auto-wired instance of the JWT service during the startup of the application. And right here, I'm going to generate a JWT token. So that will be string token is equal to JWT service dot generate token. Now what I want to pass in as subject is a map of the user name. Perhaps one of the claims should be the username. So I'll do a map dot of. Right here, I'm going to pass in the key value, which is subject. And then I'm going to pass in the object value, which should be the name of the user. So I'm going to say IO code. Now there's something I'm driving at. So then I'll click on enter, just follow my step and look closely. And what I want to do now is print out the subject value of this token. String subject is equal to JWT service dot extract subject. Then we'll pass in the token as the parameter. Then I'm going to print out the subject now. So that should be subject value. So now I'll just run the application. So our application has finished running, and you discover that we now have subject value as null, but we've set the subject right from this particular definition of the token. Sorry, right from when we generated the token, we set the subject and we set its value to IO code. But how come we don't have the subject value? One of the reasons is because inside of the JWT service, we haven't pretty much used the set subject function, the set subject call during the generation of the token. And another thing is when we take a look at this endpoint, you can use any of them. Let me use this one. When we take a look at this endpoint here, you discover that the parameter here is sub and not subject. So what I'll now have to do is just move back to my application class. Then instead of the full value subject, I'm going to remove the jet from it just to make it sub, and then I'll reload the application. Okay, now you see that the subject value has been printed out. So one thing I want you to take note of is that if you are not explicitly setting the subject inside of the JWT service class, you have to ensure that the map of key value pair that you pass in uses the value sub instead of any other string, except you have a except you want to implement a method that is going to maybe extract perhaps the username in a way. But then again, I just want to do something different, so that is it. So I hope you get a proper understanding of this concept. So next we'll be looking at how to generate or perhaps create our filter class. So right now, before we start the creation of our filter class, let us do a couple of cleanups. We want to unimplement the command line runner I previously implemented. I only did that for demonstration purpose. We don't want to fill our main class with this kind of logic. So I'm going to delete the whole of this method, as well as removing the JWT service object from the class and the unneeded classes that we imported. So that is it. So basically, we have to keep our main application class clean. So now the next step now is to create our JWT authentication filter. And in order for us to do that, I'll be placing that class inside of a package called filter. So the reason why I'm building my application like this is just to separate the different layers of the application into different package. It will be easier to debug that way if an issue comes up. So that is one. And maybe in the future you decide to add another filter to your application or another service. You don't get them mixed up in the same package. You only have packages for filter and you also have packages for service. So now I'll be creating that class. So right here I'll do an auth insert in the Java class. So I'll do filter dot jwt auth filter. So it simply means JWT authentication filter. So it's a class, so that is I'll enter. Now we've been sending requests with the use of Postman, but how about we want to see how that request is being formed in raw format. Let us take for example, if we are using a command line such as bash or PowerShell to send requests to our server, let us see how that request will look like with the use of a tool called curl. So right here inside of Notepad, I have a simple text representation of how that our request could look like. So let us take for example, this is a curl x post. It implies that this is a post request being sent to the endpoint below, which is api.example.com/endpoint. Now the dash h indicates that it's an header. And when we take a look at the header, we have two headers right here. We have for the content type and we have the authorization header, just like we saw in Postman. Well, though Postman makes everything easily readable for us because we just have to communicate with the use of the GUI that it provides. So right here, inside of our authorization, we have the bearer, and after the bearer comes the JWT token. So it depends on the application requirement. You can decide to include the string bearer. You can as well go ahead and leave your JWT token as is without including the string bearer. So we'll be looking at scenarios where even if the bearer string was included, we can as well remove it, and if it is not included but the token is present, we can decode the token. So just for your info, this is how the raw form of our request really looks like. Now for the next part, let us look at the dash j. It simply means the data that is being passed in, and we have the key and the value pair. So that is basically it. And lastly, the endpoint the request is being sent to. So with all of this, we can clearly start with the implementation of our filter class. So to create a filter, you either have to implement the generic filter class or you extend one of the abstract filter that has been defined depending on the framework you make use of that is being required by the application. So the filter will be extending is the once per request filter, and then we'll provide the logic or the implementation of the method it defines. So we can go ahead and extend that filter. That should be extend once per request filter, and we want to provide the implementation for the method. Okay, so now we have this filter method, and we also have a couple of parameters being passed in as variables to the function. So we'll discover that we have a couple of warnings right here too. So we have to annotate with at non-null coming directly from Lombok. So I'll do access Control Z, Control Shift Z. So that should be at non-null import class from Lombok, and I'll copy the whole of this. Control C, Control V. So that is it for the parameters that have been passed into this method. So one more thing is to annotate the class with the respective and required annotation, starting with at component and at required class constructor. So we'll be defining two variables for our application as global variables or member variables, as the case may be. That should be private final Jwts service, and the next is the private final user details service. If you recall, I had made mention of an interface when I was explaining the logic behind how Spring secures our application. And I made mention of this particular interface, which is the user details service. So we haven't yet provided any implementation for this interface, but we'll be doing so in a moment from now. But at first, let us start with the implementation of our JWT service, our JWT auth filter method, which is the do filter internal. So what we saw previously was on this string that shows us how a raw post request is being sent using curl. So right in our application, we want to extract the header from the request object. So to do that, we're going to create a string variable. So that should be string auth header. That is equal to request dot get header. I want to pass in authorization as a value. So that way it extract the content of our auth header. So that is it. Now the next thing we want to do is to check if the value of auth header is null, and if it is null, we want to return Control Shift Z, Control Shift Z again. We want to return from this method, but before we do that, we have to delegate our request and response object to the next filter in the chain of command. So that should be filter chain dot do filter, and we pass in the request object as well as response object. So you get it now. And the next thing for us to do now is to check if the auth header begins with a string called bearer, just like I've explained previously. So we are going to say if auth header dot start with bearer, I'm going to say auth header is equal to auth header dot sub string. Our begin index should be 7. So instead of a capital S, we are going to use a small s. So that's the substring. So it's going to create a new string from the previous value of auth header, starting from the substring 7, and assign it as the new value to our auth header. To make things a little bit easy for you to understand, the content of this authorization header is simply our JWT token. So what I have to do now is just control or perhaps auth J, the whole of this, just to highlight all the auth header string and change to JWT. My bad. And change the name of the variable to JWT token. So that should be JWT token. So this is it. So now what I want to do next is to extract the respective details from the token. At first, we'll be extracting the subject of the token, which will pretty much save in a variable called username. So I'll do a string username is equal to JWT token dot extract subject. So sorry, not JWT token, but JWT service dot extract subject, and I'll pass in our JWT token. So now we are going to get rid of our security context instance. So we are going to say security context is equal to security context holder dot get context. So it returns an instance of security context, and then we want to check that this context does not contain any authenticated entity, as well as to ensure that our username value is not equal to a null value. So we are going to make use of an if statement for that. So we say if context dot get authentication equals null and username is not equal to null, then we can query our user from wherever it has been stored. And for us to do that, we are going to be making use of the user detail service. Recall that I made this explanation in the other section where we have those dialogue perhaps those boxes where I differentiated the different stages of authentication that Spring Security provides us with, the different interfaces it makes use of. So we mentioned user detail services back then. So we are going to use our instance of the user detail service, and for us to do that, we create a user instance. So we say user is equal to no, not this one. I think I'll just insert. We have to make use of our own user class. Let's see. So I think I'll just import directly. So I'll say import code dot web dot app dot entity dot user. Okay. Pretty much didn't come out from the suggestion, so I just have to manually type it in there. So we are going to use our instance of the user detail service. So we are going to say, but at first we have to type cast. So that should be user. And we have user detail service dot load by username. So we pass in our username in the semicolon. So basically what is happening here is that at first we ensure that the security context does not hold any authenticated entity and the username value is not equal to null. So our user detail service.load.username is going to return an instance of user details. But since the class we have is a user class, we just have to typecast to user instance just to ensure that to be able to store inside of our variable user. Now that we've successfully done this part, we want to ensure that our token is still valid. So we are going to use an if statement again. So we say if jwt token dot jwt service dot is token valid. So it's basically going to return a true or false value. We'll move over to the next phase. So before I'm going to define this function inside of my Jwts service class, let us just take a look at what we have to do next. So we create an instance of username password authentication token. So for that, I'm going to use a var keyword. So that should be auth token is equal to new username password authentication token. At first, I'm going to be passing my object principal, which is the user. So that should be user, a comma, and we want to pass in a credential of null, and then the list of authority that this user has. So I think I'll just have to take a look at my user class and see what I've defined for the list of the authorities. Okay, we have to get authorities instance. So function so I'm going to move back to my service, my filter and then collapse this one at first. So I'm going to pass in user dot get authorities. So basically it's going to create a token for us. It's going to create another username password authentication token for us, and then that token will be used to build an authenticated entity. So we have to set the details of this authentication token. So we say auth token dot set details. Then we use a new web authentication details source. Dot build details. Then we'll pass in our request object. So that is it. And now we have to load up for our context again. So we are going to say context dot set authentication. Then we'll pass in our auth token. So basically this is the process to take in order for us to add an authenticated entity to our security context. So now the next thing is just to implement our is token valid method. But before that, we want to pass a chain of command for the filter. So I'm going to do a filter chain dot do filter, passing the request and the response. So then that is it. So we have to implement our token validity method inside of the Jwt service class. So move over to the Jwt service class. You can see we have this function that returns a truthy value, a boolean value, which is either true or false, and we can just do return new date dot before So basically this function is going to take our token, so we'll say string token, and we want to say token dot not token, we want to say extract expiration, and we pass in the token as the parameter. And back to our filter class, we'll have to pass in the Jwt token. So I'll say Jwt token, and that is basically it for our filter class. So the next thing we'll be looking at is how to set up and configure our filter for our Spring Boot application. So before we get started by overriding the Spring Security configuration, we have to define a couple of beans. So right here inside of our Jwt auth filter class, I've defined an instance of the user details service as well as that of the Jwt service, but we have the Jwt service as a class already in this application. However, that of the user details service, we haven't really provided an implementation for this particular interface. And if I'm to click on the user details service, we are going to see the function that it defines. So it defines just a single load by username function, and that is the function that is used to query the user based on how it has been configured. So we are going to be looking at how to create a config class that will define the respective bean I'll be needing in the application. So right now I'm going to close this one, then I'll open my file tree, and at this topmost package I want to create a new class, and that class should be placed inside of a package named config. That should be an auth insert Java class, so that should be config dot application config. So I'll just do app config for short. So basically this class is a configuration class that is going to define a couple of beans. So at first, to make it a configuration class in Spring Boot, we'll have to annotate the class with @configuration. And the next thing, because we'll be using some fit variables, we'll also have to annotate with @required args constructor. So now the first fit variable we'll be making use of is the user repository variable. The reason is because we want to load the user from the database, and in order for us to achieve that, we have to use the user repository instance. My bad. So that should be a private final user repository. That is it. So the first bean we'll be defining for this class is the user details service bean. So to do that, we have to annotate that function with @bean, and then it should be public. Then we'll specify the name of the class it returns, so it should be user details service. Then the name of the function should just be the lowercase instance of the very first character in the name of the class. So instead of our U to be capitalized, we have to make it a lowercase. So Spring understands that it's the user details service bean is trying to create. So we have to include our parentheses, and right here, if you recall, when we looked at the user details service, we saw that it defines a single function, so we can make use of a lambda expression. So we'll go back, and then we want to return. So this lambda expression takes in a username and returns the user repository instance user repo that should be in caps find by username. So this function is yet to be defined inside of my user repository interface. So right here, I'm going to click on it, and I have to define this function. So what we want to do is say optional user find by username, So basically this is it. We'll go back and we'll provide the username inside of our function call. Since it returns an optional instance, all I want to do now is just say dot or s throw. So it's going to throw an exception. So basically this is it for our user detail service bean. So the next bean we want to create is that of the password encoder. Remember that the authentication provider makes use of the user detail service to find the user and use the password encoder to validate the password of that particular user. So recall we are going to also annotate this function with @bean. Then we'll provide the name public. And this is, we are just going to return a simple class that Spring security provides for us, and that is the bcrypt instance. So we are going to say return new bcrypt password encoder, and then we close it right there. Okay, now we've defined two bean, and the next bean in line is our authentication provider. So same thing, @bean. So we want to create a new DAO authentication provider. That's also a class that has been provided by Spring. So we're going to do a variable. I'll say DAO provider is equal to new DAO authentication provider. And we're going to pass in our password encoder as a parameter in the as a parameter in the constructor, and then I want to set the user detail service of this provider. So I'm also going to pass in our user detail service instance. So that should be user detail service. And lastly, we want to return the DAO provider. So basically, these are three beans we've defined so far. Now we also have to define one more bean for our config class. So that should be at bean again. This bean is the authentication manager. Then it's going to take an instance of authentication configuration. Then what we want to do now is return config.get authentication manager. And okay, let's see. Okay, we have to add the exception signature to the method. So that is it. So just choose exception. So that is basically it for our configuration class. Now the next thing we have to do now is override the security config that Spring provides us with, that Spring Boot provides us with. So for us to do that, we'll be creating a class and we'll see how to achieve just that. So right here we have to move over to our file tree again, and since it's also a configuration, we have to place it inside of our config package. So an alt insert, and then we should be called security configuration, security config. That's okay. To make the class a configuration class, we have to at first annotate with @configuration. And then because we'll be needing some variables, some bean, we have to also annotate with @required as constructor. Now this class is going to provide our security configuration, so we'll be including the filter and the authentication filter instances in this class. Spring automatically injects them for us. So we are going to say private final That's for authentication provider. That's private. Find out Jwts auth filter, and that is for the filter. Now by default, Spring Boot configures Spring security for our application because the dependency is pretty much in our project, but that's its own default configuration. What we want to do is for our application to make use of our own security configuration, and for us to achieve that, we have to annotate this particular class with an annotation known as the enabled web security. So with enabling web security, Spring automatically knows that this class provides the configuration for for securing the application. So I'm going to do it right now. I should be at enable web security, and now we are going to create a single bin which is of security filter chain. So that should be public security filter chain, and it's going to take an instance of HTTP security. And we are going to simply return http.build. So this function shows an exception, so we are going to just add the exception to method signature. So the error indication is gone. And we have to provide the necessary configuration. At first, before we provide any configuration, we are going to be turning off CSRF protection because the JWT token is sufficient enough to cover for that aspect. So at first, we are going to say http.csrf.disable. Now the next thing we want to ensure is that our application should be protected. So any calls to any endpoint of the application should be authenticated, right? We have to make exceptions for some few ones, such as maybe registration for a new user and the login of a user or the authentication process of a user. So to do that, we are going to at first make sure that all endpoints are being authenticated. Then we can then configure it to include and permit requests to those particular endpoints that should be allowed. So we are going to say .authorize HTTP request .any request .authenticated. And the next thing is the session creation policy. For us to do that, we need to use an AND function, and session management. We want this session to be stateless, so we are going to say session creation policy should be, I don't just know why it's moving back there. So we have a session creation policy .stateless. Next should be .and authentication provider. Then we have to set our auth provider, so that should be auth provider. Remember the bin we defined inside of our app configuration class, we define the auth provider here. So this is the auth provider that Spring will auto inject inside of our security config class. So the next thing is to now set our filter, which is our auth filter. So we are going to say add filter before. Now our auth filter is going to come before the username, password, authentication filter. So basically this is the simple chain that the security instance is going to follow. That's our application pretty much follow. So we are setting the authentication filter, that's our JWT auth filter, before that of the username password authentication filter. Recall that our token will be generated based on the inputs from the user, basically the username. And inside of our authentication filter class, as our Jwts authentication filter, we can see clearly that we are creating an instance of the username password authentication token after we've validated that the JWT token is valid. So this class should pretty much, that means this filter should get executed before the username password authentication filter. So that is why we have to provide that particular configuration, since the username will be gotten from the token that is being provided by the client. So basically, for us to ensure that some particular endpoint can be accessible, we have to add a bit of configuration, that's a different method called between the authorized HTTP request and any request. So for that, we are going to include request matchers, and we are going to put in some parts. It should be slash register, and the name should be slash auth. And we want to permit the whole of these ones. Then any other request should be authenticated. So that is basically it. And I think I'll take a look at the application of properties to see. So we have a v1 before any of those things. So I'm going to move over to my security config class again. I think I'll just still have to include it. So in case there should be any changes, I'll still come right here and make changes to this particular part. So that is it for our security config class. And the next thing for us to do is to start creating DTOs. One DTO will be for user registration, and the other DTO should be for user login, that's user authentication. So we're going to start with that right now. So right here, inside of our topmost package again, I want to do an auth insert, and DTO, which simply stands for data transfer object dot user reg for user registration, and want to define a couple of fields. Also, what we need for user reg is also what we need for the class of the user registration. So basically, we need the first name, last name, email, password, age, and also the not the user ID. The user ID is automatically going to be generated, but we need the other field. So I'm just going to copy the whole of this, Control C, and right here inside of user reg, I'm going to paste in here. And then I'll also provide the necessary augmentation such as getter, setter, all as constructor, constructor. I have to include our asterisk symbol. Same thing right here. Okay, import. So, and one more thing. Okay, let's annotate with a builder too. So now we are done with the creation of the user registration class. So basically, this class just holds the details or perhaps the different fields that are required for the creation of a new user in our application. The first name, the last name, the email, the password, as well as the age. Now the next DTO that we want to create is the user authentication DTO. So it simply means it's going to hold just two fields, which should be the email and the password, or the username and the password, as the case may be. But since we are making use of email in our own scenario, we are going to be creating this class with just these two fields. So before I create the class, I'm going to copy these two fields, and then I'll go ahead and create the class inside of our DTO package. So that should be an auth insert, the shortcut for creating a new Java class, and I will give this class user auth. So this is a DTO that just holds two different fields. So right here, I'm going to paste those two fields, which happens to be the email and the password, and then I'm going to be annotating this class with the respective annotation that is required. Or better still, I just move over to my user reg, and then I'll copy the whole of this, leaving the builder annotation behind. I think this one should be enough. Then I'll just move back to my user auth, and then I'll paste it here. So basically, for the authentication of a user, we need the email and we also need the password. So with that, I think we are good to go. Now, you recall that Spring Data REST automatically exposes endpoint based on the entity that we've defined. So in the case of our user, we want to provide implementations for the authentication and for the registration of a new user. So definitely we have to create our own controller class for the user. That is, we have to create a controller class for the authentication and the registration of a particular user in our application. So for that, now we'll be creating this controller class, and I'll place the controller class inside of a new package called controller. Recall that I just want the application to be written in a way that should be understandable by every person, indicating the different layers of the application. So we have config, and then we are also going to have controller package for controller classes. So right here, I'm going to do an auth insert, a Java class, and then we'll use controller dot user controller. So that is basically it. So right here and now, we are going to have two different methods. The first method is authentication, and the second method is registration. So I'll just define those two different methods. So we are going to have public string authenticate, and then this is going to take an instance of our user authentication class. So that should be user auth details. So I think I just have to import, and this should be coming from the body. So we are going to use at request body auth insert again to import the class. And then what we want to do now is create a feed variable for our user service. So I don't want to implement the logic that authenticates the user inside of our controller class. So basically, the controller class is going to call an helper class or a service class that is going to carry out that logic for us. So I'll be creating that class inside of the service package pretty soon, but now I just have to define the feed variable for it. So I'll just say private user service, then we have user service, and then I think I have to make it final as well. And right here, I will annotate at first with at controller. So not controller, sorry for that, but address controller. So Spring creates an instance of this when the application starts up. So it's going to create a bin for us. And I'll do away with this controller import. And the next thing is to use the at required ask constructor. So this is basically it. And now I'll just say user service dot authenticate, then we'll pass in the user auth object, sorry, the auth details, pardon me, and then we use our semicolon. So recall that it's going to return a string, and this string would be the JWT that has been generated by the authentication method of our user service. So that is the string we are going to be returning. So basically, we just have to include the return statement. So it returns this. So this automatically is going to return a string for us. Now the next one is basically the registration. So we are going to say public. Now this time around, it returns a response entity of user. So we are going to say register, and then we want to request the body again at request body. Then we have user reg, and then reg details simply stands for registration details. So we are going to return user service dot register user. Then we are going to pass the reg details, and that is basically it. So let me import the user class from the entity package we've defined, and also the response entity. And I think I'll also do that here. So instead of just returning a string, I want to return a response entity of type string. So let's say response entity and the string attached to it. So we'll have to make correction to this. So we'll wrap it inside of parentheses again, and we're going to see response entity dot OK, and that is it. And yes, we do the same thing with what we have below. Ctrl C, Ctrl V, and then that is basically it. So we have our registration, our register and authenticate method defined already inside of our user controller. Now we have to do one more final thing, which is to create our user service class, and also the different method that is required by our application. So right here, I'm going to just click on this red icon, and I'm going to create a class, user service class, and I'm not placing it inside of the controller, but I'll place it inside of the package called service, and that should be it. Then I'll do OK. So right now we're going to be annotating this class with @service, just to indicate that it's a service class. And let's see the two usage we have. So we have two usage. We have from controller, and then we are going to be defining this function. So I just click on it, click on this red icon again. I'm going to be creating a method in our user service class, and then I'll just copy the whole of this again, and I'll use Ctrl D to paste or to bring it down again. Then this one I'm going to change from authenticate to register, and it takes in a user reg instance. So instead of auth details, we are going to have reg details. So now the authentication process follows a couple of processes. But let's first of all look at how to register our user. So to register our user, we need to save the user to the database. So we'll be needing the @required apps constructor, and we'll also be needing our user repository instance. So that should be a private final user repository user repo, and that is it. And then we're going to create a new user out of our user reg details. So for that, we are going to say user equals to user dot builder dot build. So in between the builder dot build, we are going to set the different fields that a user requires. So at first, we are going to be setting the email. So that should be dot set email. Okay, sorry, not dot set, but dot email. And then we are going to use the reg details dot get email dot first name should be reg details dot get f name dot l name reg details again dot get l name,
I'll leave that one at first, and .age should be reg details.get age. So for our password, we don't want to save the password in raw form inside of our database, so we want to encode the password at first. If you recall correctly, inside of our app configuration class, we've defined a password encoder, a bin of type password encoder, and this is the password encoder we are using, bcrypt password encoder. So right here inside of my user service class, I'll scroll down a bit. So I'll have to define a bin of that type. So that should be a private, because we need the bin final password encoder. Password encoder. If I could just type correctly, then I'll delete this one, and I think we'll have to encode the password that we are getting. So we'll just say password encoder.encode, and now we are going to pass in the string, which happens to be the password that is coming from our reg details. So we'll say reg details.get password, and now we are going to save our user. So one more thing, it does not return a string, it returns the type of user. So that's why we have that one related problem since, and it's gone now. And now we are going to save our user with our user repository. So we say user repo.save, then we pass in our user instance. And because this is pretty much going to return a user, that's the save method of our user repo, we just have to include the return statement before the user repo.save function or method is called. So basically we have created a method for registering our user. So that is it. Now for the authentication logic, this is what we have to do. So first off, we have to include other bins to the class, and one of such bin would be the Jwts service that will be used to generate our token. So I'll say private final Jwts service and Jwts service, and the next should be private final user details service for querying our user from wherever it has been stored. So we are going to say user details service as well, should be the name of the feed variable, so that should be user details service. And finally private final authentication manager, and I'll just use auth manager for short. So basically these are the three different instances that we'll be making use of in order to authenticate our user. Now these different bins, for instance our Jwts service has already been defined as a service class inside of our service package. However, that of the authentication manager and user details service, that are defined as being inside of our config class. So we have the user details service here, and then we also have our authentication manager right here. So these are the bins that we need. So back to our user service class, and to the authenticate method to be precise, we want to get the user at first. So we'll be making use of the user details service in this scenario. So we are going to say user is equal to user details service dot load by username, and recall that our username is the email feed of our auth details that is being passed in as parameter to the method call. So we are going to say auth details dot get email. So that is it. So now this returns a user details instance, so we have to typecast to our entity user class definition. And the next, we want to check that this value is not equal to null, or if it's equal to null, it should throw an exception. So for that, we are going to say if user equals null, then we want to throw new username not find exception, and then I want to pass in a string variable, a string value. You can pass in a string value of your choice. So my string value will pretty much be user with the provided name is not found, and that is it. However, if the user is found, then we have to authenticate the user. So we make use of our authentication manager. So we say auth manager dot authenticate, and then we are going to pass in an instance of an authentication object. That authentication object is a new username password authentication token, and then we are going to pass in the username and the password as parameters. So we are going to say auth details dot get email, and then auth details dot get password, and then I'll include my semicolon. And finally, our JWT service will be used to generate the token. So I'm going to say JWT service dot generate token, a function that we've already implemented, and I'll say map dot off. Remember, then the string should be sub, which is the subject, and the username should be our auth details dot get email. That should be our subject. So recall that this is the string that it generates, so we just have to include the return statement before the JWT.generate method is called. So it returns the token that is being generated by this call statement. Now back to our controller class. I think there's something I'm missing out. Yes, let's see. So we have at rest controller, and we need something, and that is at request mapping, and then we have to use the at post mapping, and we pass in the endpoint. Should be register. Sorry, it should be authenticate. And I just copy the whole of this, Ctrl C, and then paste it here, Ctrl V. Then this should be register. Don't think authenticate is the one I used, but auth. If I'm to go and check my security config class, let's see, my security config, and I think I made use of just auth and not authenticate. So with all of that, I believe I can run the application, and we can register a new user to this particular application, and then authenticate the user and go ahead and call the different endpoints that the application exposes. So I'll just run the application. Okay, now we see clearly that our application failed to start properly due to an exception that has been thrown, and I can see that we have a lot of query statements here. So I think it's related to JP and Hibernate in a way, basically our entity. And I can see a message that says fails to create query for method public abstract. Let me see. Let me just scroll over. Okay, user repository dot find by username, unable to locate attribute with the given name username on this managed type. So basically my entity user does not define a field called username. Instead, it defines the email field. So I'll move back to my user repository, and instead of find by username, we want to make use of find by email. But I want to first of all change the usage that we've defined already. So let me change that one. So we are going to say find by email, and then back to my user repository interface, I'm going to change this also to find by email. So that's basically it, and I think the error has been solved. We have our post mapping to our auth endpoint, our post mapping to our register endpoint, and I think for that everything is clear and we are good to go. So I'll run the application this time around, and hopefully we won't get any exception. Let's just hope for the best. So I'll run. So now that our application has started correctly, I don't want to make mention of something. So I made a little bit of changes to the code base. It was not included in this particular video section. The reason is because if we take a look at our security config class during the definition of the bean, I did something like this slash v1 slash API slash the register, and I also did it alongside with the auth. But then again, the application got a little bit messed up in a way, because for our Spring Data REST, I'm also using that prefix for each of the different entity paths that it exposes. So when I was trying to authenticate my user and also register, I was always getting a 403 forbidding response. So I had to make that change, and I had to let you know. So you also have to make that change on your own part. Okay. So with that stated, let us register a new user for our application and then authenticate, and then use the bearer token that will be generated, or the JWT token that will be generated, to call the other endpoints of the application. So right back to Postman, I already defined a register user endpoint for the post call, and I provided details using my name and also the required feed. So I'm just going to send this request again. Okay, and I think we are good to go. So basically, we return the user that has been registered. So these are the different details of the user. So my authorities at the moment is null, my account is not expired, and my credentials is not also expired. Then we can take a look at the password that is being sent back as the value. It has been encoded because our password encoder encodes the password before storing it inside of the database. So it's no longer stored in raw format. So when I try to authenticate, the application is also going to use the password encoder to decode this one and check if it is equal to what I passed in as parameter in my password feed. So we're going to be taking a look at it. So authenticate user, I've also defined the two field, email and the password of just the single user that has been registered. So I'll just show you the list of users from Postgres, and we see that we just have one user, and that is pretty much Isaiah, the first name and last name, and also the password. So right now I'm going to call the authentication endpoint send, and we see that we have the token. So I'm just going to copy the whole of this JWT token, Control C, and what I want to do now is call our get books endpoint. So I'll move back, then go to none, and I'll call it at first without any form of authorization. So when I send, we get a 403 forbidden. So what I want to do now is change from no auth to bearer token. Then I'll pass the token value, Control V, and then I'll send. So we have a 200 OK because we've presented the JWT token from a validated user. So basically that is how we secure our application using JWT token. So we have successfully passed the security phase of securing of this application. So the next phase we'll be looking at in this series is the testing of our application, and then we are going to be deploying our application to render, and you can call it a day. So now we have to get started with testing of our application. And if you can see, inside of the class, which happens to be a test class that is inside of our project. So during the beginning and the starting of the program, I did make mention of something. Let us take a look at what we have here. So we have different ways of presenting our project folders, and even these different sections of the folder. And for development process, we have on the production, and we also have test. as presented to us by IntelliJ. So if I'm to go to production, you see that we only have the codes that are related to the production logic. So all of these codes would be what we'll be making use of in our application. But then again, we also have to test our application. So let us take a look at the next one, which happens to be the test. And when I click on it, you see that we now have this test directory inside of the source. And then we have the list of, so we have our package name followed by the main application test class. Okay. Now by convention, we have to just include the test word at the end to indicate that it's a test class. Okay, and you can see that the structure that this particular class follows is that this class is annotated with that Spring Boot test, and we can also see that a function that has been defined but not yet implemented, or nothing has been inside as an empty method, has been annotated with our test, and this implies that this function is going to run a single test case. Okay, so I feel I'll make use of our normal project structure format. So I just click on project and it presents to us everything back. So now we are going to be running a couple of test cases, probably a partial integration test case, about 2 of them, and you can as well on your own part take it as a task on yourself to implement some other partial integration tests. Okay, and I think we should just start with that now. So the first partial integration test we want to be running is a test for our user repository and how it relates with the database. Okay, so what I have to do now is, okay, create a new class which I will call user repository test. You just have to follow convention. So I will use an auth insert, and then again I also want to follow the format that we have inside of our production directory. We have our user repository interface inside of a package called entity, and then I'll create that package here. I'll just call it entity dot user repository test. So basically, in our case, during the production part of it, our user repository was an interface, right? Well, in this case, I'm just doing it. I'm creating a class because probably we have to make use of class for testing our application. So I'll click on enter, and then I will annotate this class with an annotation that is pretty much different from what we saw here. So right here we have the Spring Boot test annotation, but what I'm basically checking for is logic that are related to the database and how our user repository integrate or perhaps relates with the database. So what I'll just have to do is now annotate with a data GPA test. So with this annotation, Spring Boot knows that this class is going to run test cases that are related to database implementation, and so it scans through our class path, I mean the pom.xml file, that's the dependencies that we have, and it checks for any in-memory database implementation or dependency that is inside of it, just like we have the H2 in our case. So in that scenario, data GPA is going to provide configurations for the H2 database that would be used for running this particular test. Okay, if you recall correctly, if I'm to open my pom.xml file, you will see that we have the dependency and we have a scope of test. So we previously added that dependency at the time during the development process of this video of the application. So back to our class. What next is to auto-wire an instance of user repository. So that should be a private user repository, then user repository. Then I have to just auto-wire an instance of it. So that should be auto-wired. Okay. So I'm going to create a test method, so that should be our test, and I'll call this particular method save user test, because basically we are trying to save a user and we are trying to test and see how it works with our database. So for a test function, the return method is always void, and you provide a name that is kind of explanatory. So I'm going to say save user tests, okay, and it's parentheses, and then our curly brace. So basically I have to create a new user with the builder. So just have to say user equals to user dot builder dot fname. I'll basically call this IO code fname. So you can see that in our test scenario, the password I'm using is not included, so it doesn't really matter. I just want to test and see how this particular repository integrates with our database. So I'll just provide an age of 1, basically. That's how old the channel really is. So less than 1 years old per se. So please do, you guys should do subscribe to this channel and also give this video a thumbs up. Okay, please do that. And I'll really appreciate it. Okay. Now we've created our user with the builder. Now what next is to save our user to the database. So I'm going to do a user repository dot save, and we'll pass in user. Now our user repository dot save user is going to return the user for us. So I can take that user and place it inside of another variable. I'll say user and saved user is equal to this. So we want to make use of the assets function that Junit provides us with. So I'll do an asset equals, so static method, so you have to import it. So we have the second one as sessions.asset equals from the org.junit.jupyter.api package. So this is the one you want to import. So basically just click on it, and it takes in 2 parameters, an expected value and the actual value that should be returned. So our expected value should be user, and the actual value that will be returned should be the saved user. And now I'm going to run this test case. You can click on this for just this single test case, or you can click on the class. So the class, if you click on the class, is going to run any other tests that are being defined, any other test method that are being defined inside of the class. But if you just want a single test class to be tested, you just have to click on that particular function. Sorry, if you want a single test method to be executed, you just have to click on the run button associated with that particular test function. So that's just basically it. So I'll just click on this one right here, then I'll run our save user tests. Take it up a bit. So now we can see that our test has passed successfully. So definitely our implementation was correct. So now the next thing we want to do is to check our book endpoints to test how close to that endpoint can be with an authenticated user and how its response will be with an unauthenticated user. So we'll be mocking a particular user for this. As you know it, I'll just place this particular test inside of a controller package. So that should be an auth insert and Java class, and I'll just say book controller test should be placed inside of controller. Okay, by default we didn't really define this particular class, but since we are making use of Spring Data Res, like I've stated, it exposes this endpoint for us. But then again, we want to check and see that our endpoint is properly secured. So that is the reason why I'm creating a test class for the book controller. So I would say under the hood, Spring Data Res already created that endpoint for us, but we want to test that endpoint with a scenario where a user is authenticated and a scenario where a user is not authenticated. Now, before I'm going to do any of those, I have to create an application.properties file for my test cases. So right here inside of our test directory inside of Java, no, not really Java, but the test directory itself, I'm going to create a new resource bundle directory, and inside of that resource bundle, I'm going to place my application.properties file. So I just right click and want to do a new then resource bundle, and let me see, I'll call it resources slash okay, see it's an invalid name, so I just remove it and I just click on OK. So let's see. Oops, I have to refactor this name. I think I have to do away with one of the properties and refactor. So I think I'm good to go. But then again, I want to create a directory. I want to follow the kind of file structure that we have here. Should be placed inside of resource to be precise. So I'll right click again. I'll click on new and should be directory. So basically resources. I think I'm good to go. Then I'll move this and place it right here and refactor. So the reason for this is that, okay, so sorry, I have to make proper naming for this. I have to refactor again and then rename, and this should be application test. I forgot, pardon me. So I refactor. Now the reason for this is that we want to create configurations or perhaps properties that are related to test, and we don't want to make use of what we have inside of the application or properties that is for production use only. So this application of the properties that we have here is mainly for the use of our application when it has been shipped to production. Then again, we want to have our implementation for the test cases. So what we'll pretty much be defining inside of this application of properties file is logics that are related to the database. Now, any of those logic that are not present here would be gotten from here. So the ones that this particular application of properties file defines will override what we have here. So what I want to just define is related to the database, and I'll give you a reason why I'm doing this in a jiffy from now. So I'm going to copy the whole of that, and right here I'm going to place them here. So instead of org.postgresql, we are going to make use of h2, and then our URL should be jdbc column, I think h2 column mem column test db. So I'm going to check and ensure that I'm properly using the correct URL, and I think I'm good to go. Then the next thing we want to take into consideration is our book controller test class. So I'll be annotating this class with our Spring Boot test. So in the case of Spring Boot test, it's going to start our contest for us, a whole new application contest, and it's going to definitely start up the bins that are being defined inside of our production application. And so I'll have to provide the location for our application properties file that is related to the test logic. So I'll do at test property source, and we want to provide a location for it. It should be class path column application dash test dot properties. Next thing is to configure mock MVC. So we use auto configure mock MVC. So that is basically it. Now we have to start defining properly. So at first we are going to be injecting mock MVC, so that should be an auto wired and private mock MVC. So basically this is what we'll be using to send requests to our endpoint. And the first test we want to run is to get book without a user, that's without an authenticated user. So I'm going to use my add test, and then we'll say void get books without user, then I'll just say test. So basically we are trying to get the book without any user, and it's a test instance, and then I'll provide proper implementation. So recall that from Postman, if we send a get request to our book endpoint without any particular user or any particular token, we get a response that says it's forbidden. Okay, we get a forbidden response. That's automatically a 403. So we want to ensure that without any user, the status that we are going to get back from our MVC call should be forbidden. Okay, so what we have to do now is say mvc.perform, and then we want to send a get request, and we'll provide our URL, which happens to be v1/api/books. It's not from that particular package. And what we expect, so we can see and expect our status to be forbidden. So I'll have to import our static function, and then I think for the get, it's coming from, it's a status function also, but I don't really know the package it's coming from. So let me see. I'll do an mvc.perform, and instead of get, I want to perform a post request. to this particular endpoint. So v1/api/books dot respect. So right here, okay, it's coming from mock mvc request builder.post. So I just do an alt enter, and instead of post, I just use the asterisk symbol so that my get call would be properly resolved. So I'll remove this top one. I just did it because I know definitely they are going to bring the suggestion out for me. So this throws an exception, so I just add it to the method signature. Then I think we are good to go. And this is just one of the tests. Now we're also going to be running the test with user. Okay, so I'll first of all annotate with our test again, and I think I'll copy the whole of this because basically almost the same implementation, but we just have to configure it a little bit. And at mock user, that's at with mock user, and then I'll just say with user instead of without user. Okay, so this is get books with user test, and our expected status should be is okay in place of is forbidden. Now I'm going to run directly from our class, so I just click on this icon right here. So it runs the different test cases that we have defined inside of our controller class. Okay, it happens that one of the test cases has failed. So let me check and see the reason why this particular test case has failed. So I'll see. Okay, I think it's as a result of the feeds. I think I've been through something like this before, and I think I'll just go back to my book class. That's my entity, and books. Okay, and I'll provide a different name for my column here. So that should be at column, and the name should be equal to publish here. So I think I'm good to go, and then I'll go back to my test class, then I'll run again. Okay, so basically now this time around the test has passed. So I think it's as a result of predefined configuration that H2 might have. That is why we got that particular error. I think here is pretty much a reserved keyword in the H2 database. So we'll take a close look again, and you can see that I annotated the year with at column. Then I changed the name of whatsoever it's being called in the or perhaps I changed the name from year to published year in that particular column. So take note of that. And I think our error has been resolved. I don't really think our error has been resolved. I use that word a lot, I think, but then it's how it should be. So now we have one more test case to run. So this is with mock user. So what the mock user pretty much does is it skips part of the authentication logic and just provide a predefined user from our security context. So it assumes that we are calling this endpoint using a particular user from the security context. So that is what with mock user does. But then again, we want to test our user logic for authenticating and also calling a particular endpoint with a real authenticated user. So as a result of that, I'm going to be creating a new class, which should be the user controller test. But before I do that, you can go ahead, write a test case for posting a book with user, okay? And then you have to provide the content. So I'll just give you an expo. You can do .content. Okay, it doesn't really happen that like that. So it's from here, not from there. So you can do .content. You specify your content in JSON format. Then you also include the .content type to specify the media type. Okay, so for the sake of time and as this video is not test oriented, that's fully test oriented, I'll just leave it here and I'll leave that as a task on your own part that you should handle. So right now we'll go ahead and create my user controller test class, and that should be an auth insert Java class user controller tests. So basically what we are going to be doing here is similar to what we have in the book controller class. So I'm just going to copy the whole of this and then I'll paste it there, Control C, and right here I'll paste Control V. So we'll be saving a user to the database. So what we want to do is we want to inject an auto-wired instance of our user service. So that should be a private user service, and I have to import, and then we have to also annotate with our auto-wired. To ensure that we're able to save the user into the database, we have to create a lifecycle for our test class. That's we have to create a before each function. So basically it's going to run before each test cases of the class runs. So I'll do that before each, and then void save user for test. Now our user service is going to take our user service save method or register method is going to take an instance of user reg. You all know that. So we are going to make use of user reg is equal to new user reg and passing the respective field, starting with, I think, let me see, the f name. So I'll just say IO code f name, IOcode 123 should be my password, and I'll use an age of just 1. So the next one now should be to register my reg details with the user service.register. And I have to separate all of this inside of a new line so you can see them clearly. So this is what we basically have now, and definitely our user will be saved to the database before a test call to our authentication endpoint would be executed. So now the next one is for us to now define the particular test case for our authentication logic. So that should be test, and it's a void instance. Returns a void. You all know for a test it's to return a void. So we can say authenticate user tests. So in order for us to call the endpoint, we need to also auto-wire an instance of mock MVC private mock MVC. A user sends in a request in the form of a JSON in JSON form from the client to the server. We have to present a string representation of that JSON object that is sent. So our auth endpoint in our application pastes the details of the user and converts it to an instance of our user auth class. Okay, so what we have here, if we take a look at our service class, we see that the authenticate endpoint, the authenticate function takes in an instance of the user auth. Now, to show you clearly, let us take a look at the controller class and you get the proper understanding of what I'm saying. So we pass in the request body in the form of string, and Spring Boot is going to paste, or perhaps our controller class is going to paste the details in the string form and convert it to user authentication instance, our user auth instance. So back in our test class, we have to also provide that string as a content to the authenticate endpoint. So for us to do that, we are going to say string auth JSON is equal to, we have to include our curly braces. Okay, I think we are good to go like this. So right here, I want to pass in our email. iocode@gmail.com. And the password, I think was iocode123. So I'll just do away with this part, then I'll just include 123. And one more thing we shouldn't forget about is the comma sign. So the comma is very, very important. We have to include it. If not, our test would fail. So now we're going to use our MVC object to send a post request, sending in our content in the auth.json form to that particular authentication endpoint. So that should be mvc.perform
a post request. Don't forget the post request. So what insert to import it, and it's coming from mock MVC request builder. Okay, this is the particular one that we need, so you just click on this one, and then we are going to pass in our endpoint in the form of a string, so that should be auth. Next thing is to specify the content type. Media type dot application underscore JSON, and the content should be our auth JSON. And if the content that is being passed in is valid and correct, we have to expect a status of is okay, so that should be status dot is okay. That's basically it. So we have to include the exception to the method signature, so I just had it here, and the error that popped up is gone. So right now we are going to run our authenticate user test, and hopefully we'll get the result that we expect. Okay, now our test has passed successfully, but we can do something more interesting with this particular authenticate user test function. You know that the response that is being sent back is a JSON web token. Okay, so what I want to do now is provide logic that's going to print out that JSON web token inside of our console when the test case has been run successfully. But before then, I want to point out something so you understand. Inside of our save user for test that was annotated with our before each, I could have used the user repository instance that I've made use of in this scenario right here when we did a simple test for our user repository instance. I could have just copied the whole of this and paste it inside of this function. But then again, our user service dot registered method will convert our password to an encoded format using the bequeathed password encoder being that was defined. So take note of that. So you have to follow it like this. If not, the authentication logic is going to fail because the password you are going to be providing will not be will not be the same with what you have in the database because it's not properly encoded. Okay, just take note of that. Now, like I stated, I want to do something more interesting with this. So what I want to do now is equate this to an MVC result. So that I'll do MVC result is equal to the whole of this, and right here we also have dot and return. So the response from our auth endpoint would be inside of our result. So I can say string response is equal to result dot get response dot as content get content as string. So that is it, and then I'll print out the response. I'll do an SOUT for that. Return JWT token to create a new line, then plus response. Now I want you to do something for me. Basically, I said that to take this token and send to one of our book endpoint, or perhaps the books endpoint, get our books endpoint, and get the status that is okay because we've passed in a valid JWT token. So I want you to take that on your part and do it for me. So I want this video to just be fast in a way, so I want to run things up so I can post the video so you get to see it. So with all of that stated, now this is the interesting thing I want to do. I want to print out the Jwts token so you can see it clearly. So I'll run my test again. Okay, now I'll click on this one and you can see return JWT token. So this is the JWT token that has been returned. You can take the JWT token, head straight over to the jwt.io website to decode this token, and you see the subject that subject should be equal to the username or the email that we've passed in. Okay, so that is basically it for our user test. And I could have done a lot more, but this is not a test video per se, so take note of that. And I'll be doing a video on testing of our Spring Boot application in the future. So please do subscribe to this channel and also ping that bell icon so that when these videos that I'm talking about goes live, you'll also get notified. Now, if there's anything you'd love to see and you want me to make a content on it, please do let me know in the comment section and I'll look onto it. And if it's something I can do in a short period of time, I'll get to you when I make such videos. So please do stick around. So with that, we have come to the ending of the testing of the application. You discover that we carried out 3 different tests. First of all, it's our user repository test. We tested how our repository connects or integrates with the database that is provided. Our data JPA test simply auto configures the in-memory database that we have in our class path. Unlike for the Spring Boot test, we have to provide a location for our property source. Okay, so that's why we have this particular class annotated with our test property source. So Spring Data JPA test will automatically do all of those for us, but in the case of a Spring Boot test, we have to provide the source. Now, this particular class is a full-blown integration testing, while the other ones, they are just partial integration. So just take note of that. Like here right now, we are mocking our user, and yes, it takes a mock user from our security contest, so it skips part of the authentication logic. So just take note of that and focus more on the authorization part of things. Provides us with a user that has been saved in the security contest. So that is basically it for testing of our application. Now we are done with this part. What's remaining now is the deployment of our application to render. So right now we'll be deploying our application to render. But before deployment, I'll show you a couple of changes I made to the code base. Then we're also going to be creating a Docker file, because that is pretty much what render is going to use to build an image and also start a container of our application for us. Okay, now when building your application, you want to ensure that every aspect of your application works out properly and works out fine before you deploy, because during the process of deploying, some errors might be thrown, and you want to ensure that those errors, you can confidently say they might be coming from maybe the way you set up the application and not from your own code. Okay, so I did a Maven build at first to ensure that my application works properly, and to ensure that the creation of the jar file was okay. Now, when I tried it at first, I got an error. An error was thrown because one of the test case failed. So if I'm to open my source directory, and inside of my test directory, I open Java, you discover that inside of my IO code book project application test, I've provided implementation for the context load method. I've auto-wired an instance of the user controller, and I've also included the
application test properties as our test property source in this scenario. So the major reason why the error was thrown when I tried building at first with Marvin was because I failed to do any of these. Okay, that is just the major reason. So all you just have to do is just move over to the GitHub repository, copy the whole of this, or you can pause this video at this point in time and just update your application. And then when I run the Marvin build, you run your own Marvin build on your own machine, it should come out successful. Okay, so with all of those stated, I want to be sure that our Marvin build will come out successful. I'll run the Marvin build again. So at first I'm going to clear everything on the terminal, then move up 2 steps, then I'll click on enter. So I'm running a Marvin clean package, which automatically is going to run tests for our application, any test that it finds, and also package our jar file and place inside of our target directory. So now while those processes are taking place, we want to create our Docker file. To create the Docker file, we want to ensure that we are placing the Docker file directly under the directory of our project. Okay, and to do that, we make use of an auth insert as well, and we move down a little bit and we can see an option to create a Docker file. So I'll click on it, and we've been given a template for the Docker file, but this is not what we need. I want to provide our own configuration, so I'll copy the whole of this, delete them, and I've already copied the Docker file for this application, so I'll just paste it. I'll be doing 2 things. I'll be providing the content of this Docker file in the description of the video, as well as you can also check it out on the GitHub repository. So anyone you feel is convenient for you, you can do that and just copy the content and place right into your own Docker file. So that is basically it. So let us see the result of our Maven build. So it's still building, and you can see that test cases are running. Test run 1, there are no failures. Test run 1, so we now have test run 5. Okay, and everything worked out perfectly. You can see that our build was a success. So we are very sure that our application is working and has been configured since the jar file build was a success. And the next thing for us to do now is head over to the website and see what we have here. So right here on render, we have not this one but this other one. So right here on render.com, I've created a new profile for my Chrome browser, so I'm using to just show you how it's going to look like if you are yet to have a render account. So if you don't have a render account before, you want to click on get started. I believe you all should have a GitHub account, so please, if you don't have a GitHub account, please do. It makes the development process easy, and tracking of your project will be very easy for you. Okay, so you can either create an account with any of these options: GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, or Google. So I think when I pretty much created my account, I made use of GitHub. Or you can as well provide your email and your password, and you create the account. Then you provide any other relevant details alongside that might be required. So just for demonstration purpose, that is why I got to this extent. Creating an account on Render is very easy. Okay, you don't have to provide any credit card details. All you just have to do is just create the account, and that you are good to go. You only provide credit card details when the services they are rendering to you has gotten to the stage where the free tier would not be able to provide them for you any longer. That is probably maybe your server exceeds the request or the limit of the free tier. Then you have to move over to the next tier on the list. I'll put it that way. So enough of all this explanation. I'll open my other Chrome profile, which is for the channel, and you'll discover that I have a couple of applications that are active, and I also have applications that are suspended. Now these 2 applications you are looking at, they are there are scalar applications, so you can deploy applications of any type. So far you know the process and procedure to take. Now this is my database, the PostgreSQL database application that is also running. So we'll be seeing how to create all of those for our simple IO code book project application. So now to go ahead and create a new application on Render, we have our dashboard. We just have to click on this new icon, and we want to at first create a database for our application. So I just click on PostgreSQL, and we can give our database a name. So I'll give it book DB, and I'll just have to specify it's IO code book DB. Okay, and okay, the name of the database, I'll just say IO code underscore DB, and I think this should just automatically be generated. I'll be good with that. Our Postgres version is version 16, and you can discover that we have different tiers. First of all, for hobby project, it's free for a month, for every month. But then again, you have to take note of something. I'll have to mention it here. When you are making use of this free tier of databases in Render, you just have 3 months for that database to continue being in existence. Now if you want to make use of it more than 3 months, you have to pay for it. Okay, but then again, if you want to take an option for the starter tier, you can as well pay, and it's very cheap, just $7 per month. So if you are starting off a very small scale business and the free tier would not be enough for you, you can option for that of the starter tier. Also have that of standard, pro, and pro plus. So we'll be using the free tier, and you can see free instance do not support backup. A free database expire 30 days after creation. Only one free Postgres instance can be active for any given render user or team. Okay, I think these are new changes they've made. Prior to this period, when I used it before, the free database expires 90 days after creation. So pretty much even the IO code one I'm making use of for the application is still very active since it's not up to 90 days. So I think these are just a new upgrade on their terms and conditions. So that is it. Now we want to create the database. Okay, you can see error cannot have more than one active free tier database. Okay, so I think I'll have to look for a way to work around this. Okay, now I'll have to go back to my dashboard, and I think I'll have to move over to settings. I'll have to suspend, back to my dashboard again, settings, close. I'll also have to suspend the database so that I'll be able to create a new database for our project. So back to PostgreSQL, and IO code book DB should be the name of my database. I think IO code DB is in OK and free, and then I'll create a database. So that is just basically it. This services they are rendering is just for hobby use only. So if you are making an application and that application is what you want to scale,
users might make use of that application, definitely go for the paid version. So they have different tiers, so definitely make use of the paid version. But just for demonstration purposes, I had to suspend my other running database instance, so I'll be able to show you how you can deploy on render. Now, while this application is starting up, while our database is starting up, I want to create a new web service, and we want to build and deploy from a Git repository. So I'll click on next, and we want to connect a repository. As you can see, we have options for the different repositories that are present inside of my GitHub repository. But the one I want to make use of is the IO code boot project. So that is what I'll select. I'll connect to it, and I think I have to duplicate this page. So this is the name of our web service. I'll go down a little bit. Yes, we'll leave the main, and we'll leave this one as is. Now our runtime should not be Node, but Docker. Then we also have an option for the free tier, so we'll click on it. You can see free instances are pinned down after periods of inactivity, and they do not support SSH access, scaling one-off jobs, or persistent disk. Select any paid instance type to enable these features. Okay, so like I stated, if you want to create an application you want to scale, you make use of any of the other options. So you can make use of starter, standard, or as the case may be, any one of your choice. Now we have this option of setting variables. Okay, so the name of the variable at first should be our RODB URL. Next should be our RODB username, and one more, think our RODB password. I think that should be it. Now the reason I duplicated my render endpoint is because I want to get details of my running database from this other tab. So I'll click on dashboard, and our IO code book DB, I'll click on it. And now I want to copy the whole of this. First of all, the password, I'll copy the password, move back, and paste it here, and back to the username, I'll copy the username as well, paste it here, and our URL for the database. So for internal database, I think I have to be very sure. So let me at first click on my dashboard, move over to suspended, and IO codes, and see how I define the environment I have here. So my URL, okay, I'll just copy everything right here, Control A and Control C. Now move back here, I'll paste it. This time around I'll just delete this part. Back here, we go back to our internal URL again, and from here we'll have to copy, after the authority symbol, I'll copy the whole of the next stuff. So this should be it, Control C, and I'll paste it here. So this is basically everything that we need. And now I want to create our web service. So the creation of our web service is practically going to take some time. So I'm going to pause the video, and when the application has successfully been deployed, we are going to come back and take the endpoint that it exposes for us, that is the URL, and make requests to that URL using Postman. And so right now we've successfully deployed our application. But before I move any further, I'll have to make mention of something. So if I'm to open up IntelliJ, so right here, inside of our Docker file, I missed something, and that was the snapshot version. So I made use of a wrong snapshot version. So as a result of that, my first build from render failed. So I had to make that correction. So these are basically the small errors that might occur during the development of an application. So please take note of those things. Okay. Now with all of those stated, let us take a look at the endpoint that render has automatically generated for us. We have it right here. The https iocode-book-project.onrender.com. So what I basically want to do is open this in a new website. So I just on a new tab, so I'll click on it, and we basically have access to iocode book project was denied because we don't have authorization to view this page yet. So what we want to do now is copy the whole of the URL, Ctrl+C, and then we are going to go to Postman, and at this before the register endpoint where we have our localhost, I'm going to copy the whole of those and paste our new endpoint here. Then the details I'll be using to send in requests should be iocode@gmail.com. That's for our registration. Then the password should be iocode123. I think I can leave the first name, the last name as is. Then what I just have to do now is send my request to the register endpoint. Okay, I have just 2 /. I just need one, so I deleted. So I'm going to delete that one, which I already did. And now I'll send my request to the endpoint. So yeah, we have the details of the user. Okay, so this basically it has returned, and we have a 200. Okay, and yes, we successfully deployed. Now I want to authenticate with these credentials I've provided, and I'll move to my auth part, Postman. So we'll use iocode@gmail.com and iocode123 as the password. And now I'm going to send in this request. Oops, okay, there's an error. I failed to update my URL. So I'll correct that and remove one of the / again, and then I'll send. So we have the JWT token has been sent back. Okay, so I'll copy the whole of this JWT token now, and to the getBooks endpoint, I want to provide our bearer token. I'll place the token right here, and I'll have to update my URL again. Ctrl+V. Oops, that is pretty much wrong. I'll
Go back to my browser, Ctrl C, Ctrl V, and then I'll send. Okay. As you can see, we have a 403 forbidden, probably because this particular endpoint is not in the application. So that's an error on my part. It should be v1/api/books. Now I'll send again. Okay, the bearer token was incorrect. I'm sorry for that. So I'll copy the whole of the bearer token again. And then I'll go back to the get books part, and you discover that right here our bearer token is starting with the character Y, but it's supposed to start with the E. So I'll just make the correction, just place my E, and then I'm going to send to my getBooks endpoint, and we have a 200. Okay, I want to look at the body of what we have here. So this is our endpoint that we just paid that we just send this get request to, and basically we don't really have any books stored inside of our database yet. But then again, we can copy the whole of this, Ctrl C, and then go to our create books endpoint, paste it right here, and authorization, we want to set our bearer token again, and go back to our get books and copy the whole of this token, Ctrl C, and Ctrl V, and I'll send in this request to create a new book inside of our database. So we've created this new book in our database, and now when I call the get books endpoint, this book should be queried back. Okay, this book should be returned alongside the list of books that should be returned. So we have the Romeo and Juliet, and we also have the year and the price. So let's basically take a look at the logs that we have on render. So I'm going to scroll down a bit, and let's see. Can go check the logs, and we can see that select statements are being executed. That is, SQL statements from Hibernate are being executed. So we have select from book, and we have the publish here, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then let us also take a look. I think there should be an insert statement also. I think an exception has been thrown, but that shouldn't be our main concern for now. I just want to see the part where we created our new user. Okay, with this where we created our new user. It says insert into user age, email, first name, last name, and password. So basically we successfully built and deployed our application on render. So this is basically the process that a web application follows, as a backend application follows. We have the building phase, which is development phase, the testing phase, and then the deployment phase. Okay, now there's a quick final note I'd love to add. Hello, so the video we just concluded is a complete Spring Boot backend application project. So it's basically a video where I've shown you how the step-by-step procedures on developing an application works. So look at the three different phases that we can have in the development and deployment of an application in full. So we looked at the building phase, we look at the testing phase, and we finalized everything by deploying our application on render. Okay. Now during the development processes of an application, there is a forward and back movement due to the fact that during most processes there may be exceptions that will be shown or there may be errors that may arise. So you just have to take note of that, try to find the error, fix those errors, and then you fall back to the next stage of the application. Now with all of those stated, I would like to beg on you once more. If you are yet to subscribe to this channel, please do so. Give this video a thumbs up and also ping that bell icon so that when I upload the next video, you'll get notified. Peace out and until the next one, keep being your best self. I remain Harry Cole.